Alright, so now we are going to begin with the next topic, the next type of biomolecules, which are lipids. In this lecture, we are going to have an introduction about lipids, that what lipids are and what different functions they carry out. In the coming session, we will study more about the classification of lipids. Lipids generally are those substances which are soluble in organic solvents. Lipids, since they are nonpolar, so their solubility in water is quite low. They are either, well, there are several different types of lipids, so many of them, they are either completely insoluble in water. And some of the types, they are only soluble in water to a little extent. Since they're nonpolar, so they are more soluble in other less polar or non-polar solvents, mostly the organic solvents. The organic solvents, many of the organic solvents, they are less polar than water. For example, chloroform and methanol are less polar as compared to water. Other organic solvents, they are nonpolar like hexane. So lipids are nonpolar, so they are more soluble in organic solvents as compared to their solubility in water. They're either completely insoluble in water or only soluble in water to a certain extent. There are many different types of lipids, which include fats, oils, several different types of vitamins, and hormones. They all are included in the category of lipids. Well, here you see in this cartoon that it shows that lipids are unable to interact with water. So you can see this water molecule here, and the water molecule is saying that I'm sorry, we just can't be together. And the lipid molecule is saying, why is it so that I'm fat? So that shows, the cartoon shows that the lipids are unable to interact with water. Lipids are important for living things for a variety of different reasons. They carry out many important functions in the cells, in the bodies of living things. One important function we know about is their contribution towards production of energy. Lipids, well, one type of lipids are fatty acids. Fatty acids, like carbohydrates or proteins, the carbons of the fatty acids also undergo oxidation. And because of this oxidation, it produces acetyl CoA. Remember that acetyl CoA is a two carbon compound, which the carbons of which are used for the citric acid cycle or the tricarboxylic acid cycle. That is also called as the Krebs cycle. So the carbons of acetyl CoA are metabolized through the subsequent pathways, and eventually it contributes to production of energy. This energy, we all know that is eventually in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So that is one important role we all know about, which is the contribution of lipids for energy production. But lipids are also important for several other important functions. For example, many different types of lipids, they are important for carrying out cell signaling. The term signaling means interaction of cells by sending special type of signaling molecules through special type of mechanisms cells communicate with one another. This process of communication is called as signaling. The process of signaling is important for bringing about several changes in the cells. When the cells they receive a signal, they carry out a certain function in response to that signal. There are several different ways in which lipids contribute to the process of signaling. One such process is that there is a type of lipids which are called phospholipids. Phospholipids are the constituents of biological membrane. From your prior knowledge in cell biology, you would be remembering that cell membranes are made up of lipid bilayer. So there are two layers of phospholipids which are assembled in form of the membrane. This is a diagrammatic representation of the structure of a phospholipid. The phospholipid shown here is phosphatidylcholine. The name is not important right now. Let us just say that this is a phospholipid represented in this figure. So one such mechanism of signaling is that the membrane phospholipids, they through a process by a specific enzyme, their polar head group is removed. Here you can see this is one fatty acyl chain shown here. This is the second fatty acyl chain of this phospholipid, and this part is the polar head group. So through activation of specific enzymes, the polar head group is removed. The remaining part is called as diacylglycerol. One of the ways lipids contribute to signaling is that upon activation of a specific enzyme, the polar head group of the phospholipid is removed. The remaining part of the lipid is called as diacylglycerol. Diacylglycerol in turn activates several types of protein kinases. Kinases are those enzymes which carry out the phosphorylation of proteins. They attach a phosphate group on the substrate protein. So when the formation of diacylglycerol takes place in response to a signal, diacylglycerol in turn activates protein kinase. That protein kinase, when activated, is going to interact with the substrate proteins and phosphorylate those substrate proteins as well. In this way, the activation through diacylglycerol results in transferring the signal into the cell. Another important thing which the lipids do is that the lipid cholesterol is a precursor to steroid hormones. Steroid hormones, they're derivatives of cholesterol. The structure of cholesterol is shown here in this figure. Cholesterol, through a series of chemical reactions, is converted into these various different types of steroid hormones. The steroid hormones, they are important for regulating many important functions in the body. We will take a look at cholesterol and its derivatives at the end of this topic. Cholesterol is a precursor to steroid hormones. That is one important function which cholesterol carries out. In addition, cholesterol is an important constituent of the cell membranes as well. Cholesterol is a rigid ring structure, and it is important for regulating the fluidity of the membranes. So another important function of cholesterol is that it is a constituent of biological membranes. Cholesterol is also a precursor to vitamin D. You would have heard about this, that people say that if you are exposed to sun, your body produces vitamin D. And that is because of the reason that the radiation from sunlight, they produce a structural change in cholesterol and converts it into a precursor of vitamin D. This precursor undergoes further chemical conversions in the liver and in the kidney, and eventually it is converted into the active form of vitamin D. Cholesterol is also a precursor to bile salts. Bile salts are important constituents of bile. Bile is a pigment which is produced by the liver and it is stored in the gallbladder. Bile is important for the assimilation of lipids. So cholesterol, generally people say that cholesterol is something bad for your health. Well, an excess of cholesterol is bad for you. But now we have just seen that cholesterol is important for many important functions in the body. For example, it is a precursor to vitamin D. It is important for production of bile. It is a precursor to the steroid hormones and is also a constituent of the cell membrane. So cholesterol is indeed a very important substance for the body, and that is the reason that the cells of the body produce cholesterol as well. Vitamin A and D are also fat soluble vitamins. They're also categorized in this category of lipids. The structure of vitamin A and vitamin D is shown in this representation. While we know about their roles, that vitamin D, one important role of vitamin A is that it is important for vision. In addition, vitamin A is also important as a signaling molecule. It is important for the development of cells, especially during the embryonic stages, and also it is important for the development of cells later in life. Vitamin A is obtained through different types of plant products. There is a type of pigments present in plants which are called as carotenes. Carotenes are a precursor to vitamin A. Carotenes are present in many different types of plant products. For example, carrots. People advise to consume carrots, and they say that you would have a good eyesight if you would consume carrot. The reason is that carrots contain carotenes in them. They contain a type of carotene which are called as beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A. So consuming carrots help with, with respect to your vision, and that is the reason that rabbits never use glasses because they eat a lot of carrots. Vitamin D is also another important type of vitamin. We know about its role is that it is important for the absorption of minerals in the body. When you consume food, the food goes into the gut, and then through the gut, it is absorbed, um, through the intestines, it is absorbed into the bloodstream. Vitamin D, one of the roles of vitamin D is that it is important for the absorption of the minerals into bloodstream. In addition, vitamin D also acts as a signaling molecule. It is important for regulating many different types of processes in the cell. It is, since it is a lipid, so it can cross the cell membrane. It acts as a hormone. It binds to its receptor and it regulates gene expression in the target cells. So both vitamin A and D, which are also included in this group of lipids, they not only act as vitamins of some of the function of which we already know about, but they also act as signaling molecules. The last one on this list are the prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are a group of compounds. There are many different types of prostaglandins. They are derived from arachidonic acid. Later, we will look at the structure of arachidonic acid, and then later we will also talk about the role of prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are cyclic compounds and they are important for many different functions in the body. They are important for mediating inflammation. They're important for regulating blood pressure. They're important for regulating body temperature and many other functions. So prostaglandins, they regulate, they mediate several important functions of the body. And prostaglandins, they are derivatives of a type of a fatty acid, which is called as arachidonic acid. So here on this list, you can see many different and important functions which lipids are carrying out with respect to cell signaling and communication. Lipids are also important with respect to insulation. Lipids, they form, well, different types of lipids, they form a covering, they form a layer around the body of living things. For example, wax and cuticle found in plants they are also examples of lipids. Cuticle, for example, is present on the exterior of the plant body and is important for preventing the loss of water. Wax is also a protective layer. In this figure here you can see honeybees. The honeybees, they produce honey as well as wax, and wax is acting as an insulation and as a protective layer. Animals also have a layer of fat beneath their skin. This is called as subcutaneous fat. This layer of fat beneath the skin is important for regulating the body temperature. It acts as an insulator of heat and therefore is important for regulating the temperature of the body. Those animals which live in cold environments, they have a very thick layer of subcutaneous fats, which in turn helps in regulating their body temperature against the very low temperature of the surrounding. Lipids are also important constituent of the membrane, and in this way they form the biological membranes. This does not only include the cell membrane but also the other membranes of organelles. So all of the organelles which are bound by membranes like nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast, all three of them, they have two membranes around them. In addition, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, lysosomes, and several other organelles, they're also surrounded by membranes. So all of these membranes, the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, and also the membranes of the organelles, they all are made up of different types of lipids. Since lipids, they are nonpolar, they are hydrophobic. So water molecules and other polar molecules cannot freely move through the membranes because the interior of biological membranes is hydrophobic because it contains fatty acids which are nonpolar. So the membranes, they are act as a watertight seal around the cell. So polar substances, charged substances, they are unable to move through the membrane. They pass through the membrane through special transporters. In this way, the membrane acts as a hydrophobic seal around the cell and therefore is important for regulating the process of transport. Fats and oils are examples or other types of lipids. Fats and oils, they are made up of different types of mixture of lipids. They contain monoacyl, diacyl, and triacyl cholesterols in them, with different types of fatty acids present in them. We are going to look at those different types of fatty acids in the coming lecture. Fats generally are found in animals and they are solids at room temperature. Oils are obtained from plants, mostly the seeds of the plants, and they are liquid at room temperature. Later, we will talk about the different types of fatty acids present in them, and also we will comment about this that why fats are solids at room temperature and why oils are liquid when we look at the structure of their constituent fatty acids. A quick few words about membranes. Membranes are made up of lipids. Phospholipids are one important type of lipids which are found in the membrane. There are some other derivatives and some other types of lipids which are present in the biological membranes as well. One important function of the membranes is that they are important for the compartmentalization of different parts of the cell. Different regions of the cell, they carry out several different types of processes. The membranes surrounding those organelles, those different compartments or regions of the cell, they are going to partition the cell into several different regions, several different compartments. For example, the pH of the cytoplasm is close to 7, which is neutral, but the pH of the lysosomes is acidic. It is around 5. The, the acidic pH of the lysosomes is maintained by the presence of the membrane around the lysosome. Another example of compartmentalization is the mitochondria versus the cytoplasm. The environment of the cytoplasm is reducing, whereas the mitochondria are carrying out oxidative phosphorylation. So different regions of the cell, different parts of the cell, they're enclosed by these biological membrane, by the organelle membrane. And the membranes are going to act as a barrier to separate these different parts of the cell so that different functions, different chemical reactions, they could be carried out independent of each other in these compartments, in these regions of the cell. So the membranes are going to act as a barrier. The membranes are made up of lipids which have an hydrophobic interior. So therefore, substances cannot freely move through the membranes. Movement of substances is mediated by special type of transport proteins which are embedded in the membrane. In this way, the process of transport across the membrane is regulated. Membranes also act as a scaffold for carrying out different types of processes. For example, production of ATP is done through oxidative phosphorylation. This is done by using a complex called as ATPase. ATPase is present on the mitochondrial membrane. The process of electron transport takes place by the carriers which are associated with the membrane. In turn, they use the energy of the electrons and eventually through a series of reactions transfer that energy to the ATPase for the synthesis of ATP. This process is taking place on the mitochondrial membrane. Another important process shown here is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process through which plants produce their food in form of glucose. This process is mediated by the chloroplast. On the membrane of the chloroplast, there are photosystems. The photosystems, they absorb the energy of sunlight. In turn, the electrons are excited. These electrons are then transported through the carriers. This process is again taking place on the membrane, the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast. Signaling or signal transduction is a process of transducing the signal to the interior of the cell. When a cell receives a signaling molecule, the message has to be transferred to the interior of the cell. Therefore, it has to cross the membrane. Now, most signaling molecules, they themselves are unable to pass through the membrane. So they generally bind to the receptors on the surface of the cell, and then the proteins and other molecules associated with the membrane are important for transferring that signal to the interior of the cell. In this way, the membrane is and the membrane embedded molecules are important for the process of transferring that signal to the interior of the cell. The last process on this list is the transmission of nerve impulse. Transmission of nerve impulse is mediated in form of electrical impulses, more appropriately electrical current. This electrical current is produced through the gradient of ions which are present on the outside and on the inside of the membrane of the neurons. There are sodium and potassium ions which are present across the membrane, and when these ions they flow down the gradient, they produce an electrical current. Production of this electrical current and in turn transmission of the nerve impulse is mediated by the gradient of ions across the membrane of the neuron. So, therefore, the membrane is going to act as a barrier to partition these ions and, in turn, is important for the propagation of nerve impulse. Here on this slide, we see the classification of different types of lipids, including fatty acids, triacylglycerols, glycerophospholipids, sphingolipids, and sterols. We are going to talk about these different types of lipids in the coming lecture.